What if everything you've accomplished so far has been leading you right here to a moment of clarity? What if the pressure you've been feeling lately is actually pointing to something more aligned, more meaningful, and more true to who you are? And what if this season is the beginning of something better? Have you ever wondered, is this it? That question is the beginning of your next success. I am Dr. Carolyn Sangle, and this podcast is your space to pause, reflect, and create the career and life you were made for. We explore real stories, intentional transitions, and practical insights to help you step into alignment, purpose, and peace. In today's episode, you'll hear from Renée, a brilliant, highly accomplished operations leader who built her career with purpose, excellence, and impact. She's the kind of person who brings energy into a room, lifts others up, and gets things done. Over time, though, the weight of growing responsibilities, personal loss, and the unspoken pressure to hold everything together began to wear her down, inside and outside of work. In part one of our conversation, you'll hear how it all built up, and the moment she gave herself permission to pause, reflect, and reach out. This episode is about resilience, reflection, and the power of recognizing when something needs to shift, so you can create the space to reconnect with yourself. Renée, help me understand a little bit about you, your career history, all of those kinds of fun things, however you'd like to start.
So I think I'd like to start with growing up on a farm in Guernsey County. My parents had moved from Detroit, Michigan. They were the Green Acres of folks. So they moved from the big city and bought a farm with no farming experience. And that taught me so many things, just resourcefulness and willing to try anything. My parents built their own house and had a garden, cows, a horse, and a little crazy farm that a lot of people dream of. They made a reality. So that's how I grew up. Unfortunately, my father passed away of cancer when I was little. I was 10, and my mom raised me. And as I was growing up, she always noticed that I like to tinker with things and make things better and solve all the problems. So as I was in high school, she said, all of the presidents of all the companies I've ever worked for have been engineers. And I think you could be an engineer. So go to school and be an engineer. And if you find something you like better, then fine. You can do whatever you want. She never limited me or forced me into it. And I thought, engineering sounds pretty good. So getting into the University of Akron, it was amazing. Enjoyed the classes, and maybe I took a non-traditional route of college. I ended up working full-time, getting my degree, mechanical engineering technology. It took a little bit of time, but I got some great work
And
experience
you
in
paid
there.
for yourself, right?
Yeah, a whole lot of it. We had some bonds that we had from my grandparents that we cashed in and took out some loans, but that wasn't enough to cover all of it. There was actually a semester that I carried baggies of change down to Spicer Hall and counted out quarters and nickels and dimes for I don't know how long. It was a long time with the registrar down there. Back when you did things in person, there was a hall to go to. You didn't just send a credit card. That was my career of college.
And when you were in college, where
And,
did you work?
Yeah, so I worked at a few different places. I worked at Rob's Dining Hall. So I got up early in the morning and helped with breakfast and set up all the breakfast lines and worked with the kitchen staff and helped with that. I also worked on the Residence Life and Housing Board there for RHPB. We worked on that together. And
Spoiler alert, we've known each other for
so
years.
for a little while, just a little while. So that paid for room and board. And that's the reason I got into that. And then I also was an RA for a year over in Grant Hall. And I worked with Carl Crow. He was one of the hall directors and I was
Oh,
his
wow.
admin. And he taught me a lot about office work and just getting along with people. He was very understanding to work for and a really great guy. Yeah, lots of jobs.
To get
College.
through. And then, so I'm a big proponent of it's going to take whatever it takes and whatever is the
Yeah.
necessary
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
But you said something like it took a
Yeah.
little while. How long did it take you to
Yeah.
go through college?
Yeah. The typical program is 5 years with internship. So I did an internship and it took me 9 years. Part of that was because I worked for a company that ended up
Oh.
closing and promised to pay for my degree and my classes, and they didn't. So working at a barely minimum wage job, I had to save enough money to pay for a whole semester on my own that I thought was going to be covered.
So there was a company and it sounded like a great deal for you to work for them.
Yep.
And in return, they were going to invest and you believed them. What kind of
Absolutely,
a
yeah.
company
Yeah.
was that?
Yeah. So we made streetlight poles. It was a really neat company. I had finished my internship and it was my first engineering job. I think I got the job purely because of my persistence and I
Yeah.
wanted the job. I liked the company. I thought it was a cool idea. It was a newer company. I think I might have been their second engineer or maybe third that they had hired. And I got to do a bunch of stuff. It was a small company, my first real manufacturing job. And I got to see things get built. It was really, truly amazing. And to see how all the people worked together. There was one accountant and one purchasing agent and one like main engineer. And eventually I became the project manager there and managed the projects. And it was just a really cool, very small, hands-on company. But the president of the company, unfortunately, ended up being a crook. And he took some money from some folks and did some bad things. And yeah, so one of those things was promising to pay for my education. And so I, on good faith, took that and didn't know to have contracts and things like that in place at a age of, I think, maybe 19, 20 when I started there. It was just part of it, though. And I feel like
Persistent. So even though that, this is the recurring theme with you, Renee, I believe, is that there is some sort of challenge that could be completely debilitating for other people. And yet you just rise up and you're like, okay, next. And that happened. And I'm going to keep going towards my goal. I'm going to keep doing what I believe is right. Where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, really, I guess my parents, that's really how, they started a farm and they didn't have farming experience. Nobody in their family had real farming experience. And my dad had a wood shop and we would just make stuff all the time. And we'd make puzzles. And if things didn't work, we'd try it again. And I would say my dad was probably the biggest person in my life. I was always daddy's girl, being on the farm, and I would collect eggs from the chickens and just that almost a movie set. Couldn't even ask for anything better as a child growing up in Guernsey County on a farm and being able to do anything I wanted to, make anything or try anything I wanted to.
And just that like resilience and work ethic, ability to see something through even if you don't see the immediate result. Okay, so the place promised to pay for your education, that fell through, and then you still persisted to do it anyway. And then what happened? Walk us through that.
Yes, and then I got married. Some people talk about, oh, you can't get married until after you graduate from college. And I don't know that I would have finished my degree had I have not married my husband, Todd. He pushed me to go to school when we didn't have two nickels to rub together. And we worked so hard and he was always working. Eventually we found a real small apartment in a pretty crummy kind of neighborhood and we made it work. And I finished my degree. I worked full time. I ended up taking 21 senior level engineering credits to finish my degree. I was working for another company at that point then. The first company, the streetlight pole company, closed. And so I got another job and they said they had an engineering position open, but I had to finish my degree. And so I crammed in as much as I could and I got one semester. I literally didn't have a holiday for an entire fall semester just to get 21 engineering credits, full-time work, and sometimes
And what was
sleep
the
in there.
company that you were working for then? What did they do?
Yeah, so they made PVC film, which is
Yeah.
like saran wrap. It used to be an RJ Reynolds company back in the day, but yeah, I think I can share the company is Linpack Film Co. And they were based out of a European country. And so I got to travel and do some truly amazing projects there. It was such a great experience working there. And it was the first manufacturing plant that I'd been in that was big enough and had support from other companies and other branches. They had multiple people in different departments, so I could kind of see how that level worked.
Were there any
And
other women?
for a little while, I worked for the purchasing manager, and she pulled me out of the maintenance stuff where I had started doing maintenance purchasing. And she gave me a job doing purchasing for like raw materials and some of the components and things that we use. And there was a lot of support staff there, but typically coming from the engineering and maintenance side, I worked with all men. I was all of 23 years old, and I had to walk into a maintenance department with well-seasoned guys. So you can imagine those guys are in their 50s and 60s. And at first I worked with them, and then eventually they reported to me. It was an interesting shift, but we always had a great relationship, and I really enjoyed
How
that job
did
a lot.
you break through? Because sometimes being one of the only women in a department of much more experienced people, there could be a little bit of interesting looks or opinions. But how did you?
Yeah, for sure.
What was your tactic to push through that or gain their trust?
I don't know if it was a tactic, but one of my first days there, the roughest, gruffest guy in the maintenance crib who always wore the cutoff shirts and was known to be the like number one welder, and nobody kind of screwed with him. He walked up to me, and you're going to have to bleep this if it's not appropriate.
I'm sure I'm going to have to
He
bleep a
walks
lot
up
of
to
stuff
me.
as we go forward, because just saying. Not from you, from me.
He walked, yes. He walked up to me and he said, "I don't know what kind of sense of humor you have." I said, "You're just going to have to try and find out, and we'll see." I'm maybe 22 at this point, right? And he said, "Bitch, get me a bearing." And I just looked at him and I wasn't quite sure what to say. And I said, "What kind of bearing would you like? Roller bearing, a ball bearing? We're going to have to be a little more specific." And he just laughed and walked away. And I think that might have been like my
You just
breakthrough
rolled with the
day.
punches. Yeah.
And he wasn't that kind of guy. He just wanted to see where the barriers were and boundaries and how far he could push it. And once he got through it, he was just a super sweet guy and very nice. And honestly, the whole department really took care of me. I don't know if I'd say like I was their daughter, but they certainly took care of me. And I felt that way. I felt appreciated, and we worked well together, and it was good.
So then what happened?
So after about 6 years at that company, I got to travel internationally and work with people in France and England, and went to those countries. And South America, I got to go to Uruguay and make good friends with some of our coworkers down there. It was such a great job. I loved it. But I wasn't looking for a job. A headhunter called me and he said, "What would it take for you to come work for this company?" And so I asked for everything I could imagine. I raised my price more than what I thought, which, by the way, now it was very low. It was not a very high starting wage, but I had worked my way up in my career. Now I have my engineering degree. I'd been an engineer for a little over a year, starting on those lower rungs. And I went for an interview at that company, asking for everything, and I didn't have anything to lose. So I was very calm and confident. I think that was one of the things that maybe set me apart from the other engineers who maybe were really looking for that job. And I wasn't. I could totally be myself. And a few of the guys there that interviewed me really saw that. And they offered me the job, and I took it. And with tears in my eyes, I left my friends at my company that had been there for 6 years and traveled with, and went to start at the place I've been now, I had been for 18
Wow.
years. And so that was just the start of an 18-year
So
career.
interestingly, it all started with a headhunter and a conversation about an opportunity that you didn't even know existed. And then you took a leap of faith and ended up having 18 years there. What was it that made you choose to do that, to take a leap of faith after you interviewed? Like, what made you decide that thing?
Yeah, I think I was looking for, I'll call it a little more respect. At the company I'd been with for 6 years, I had worked my way up from maintenance purchasing to a purchasing clerk, then through a couple different jobs there, and then ended up being the engineer for the company. And I got the impression that it was just another raise for getting a full degree. It wasn't moving that bar high enough to say, yes, we value you now as an engineer. I was still the Renée who got married and went to school and then just got a degree. It was just another step in that space. And even though we'd accomplished some really big projects, we made equipment in different countries and worked with teams that spoke different languages and had to arrange things over. If you have ever worked with French companies, they shut down for the month of August. So we had to get everything done on a deadline and ship it overseas and be ready to start in September when they got back, and had people from multiple countries here speaking multiple languages. And we had accomplished all of that. Now, I was just one part of it. I'm not taking credit for all of that, but I was certainly part of that. And I don't think that they valued that position. And I don't think it was because I was a female engineer. I really don't. I just think it was they didn't value that position and what I could bring or what I could do for the company.
And so when you had another opportunity of the recruiter seeing something in you greater than you saw yourself, and then that company offering growth, etc.
Yeah, everything that I asked for.
It seemed like a good move. Now, you mentioned that back in the day, your mom had said something about being a president of companies and thought you could do that sort of thing. What did you think? What did you consider as far as when you're in your high school self or younger self? What did you think success would look like, or what did you think you wanted your career to be?
Yeah, that's great. We've talked about this over the last year and a half as we've worked through this program. And I really, it was just part of what my life was going to be, to be the president of a company. Like, it was never even a question of whether I'd go to college. And I asked my mom one time, how did you do that? You never said you had to go to college. And she said, I just talked about what would happen after you did those things. And she said, after college, then you can get a car, or then you can, whatever I wanted at the time. She would say, after college, then you'll be able to afford your own car, or whatever it was. And little things like, when I was getting ready for prom, I remember my mom did my hair and had it all perfect. And she said, now that's your White House hair. When you get into the White House, that's what your hair should look like. And
girl, take me with.
I
want White House hair.
It was awesome. I have pictures. Insert picture here. And it was, so she never told me what I had to do, but she set those expectations and set them quite high. And so it wasn't until you and I started working together that I realized that maybe that wasn't my dream, or maybe it was, but it was how I got there was more because she set that as an expectation. And so I joked with the president of the company that I was in for 18 years that someday I wanted his job as president, and I meant it. And so I expected to be president of a company. I don't know. I think I picked a random age of 35 because that seemed real old. Yeah. It just seemed like the age of maturity. And where you had your stuff all together. You knew exactly what life was going to be like. And at 35, that's goes. Yeah, I had a whole life plan of exactly how things were going to go. And we're working on most of it. But now I think with the work that you and I have done together, that now it's even more flushed out and more
So
intentional.
let's talk a little bit about that. So we've heard a little bit here of you were at a company for 18 years. You left the company you had been before because of the growth and the opportunities, and something must have happened that you stayed at a company for 18 years, but yet then we've been, aside from being friends, we did lose touch for a little bit of time. Although, like anybody that's actually my friend, it's okay. A day, a decade, anything can go by. And the minute we get back together, it's like nothing ever changed. Let's talk a little bit about before the calm before the storm. So you were at a company for 18 years. You came in and you started at what position? And then you worked your way up a lot and had quite big responsibilities. Let's help our listeners understand a little bit about that before we get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. So I started as the plant engineer and maintenance manager, maybe. I forget exactly the title, but I got to run the maintenance and engineering. There was no engineering at the plant, and that was me. So I also worked with the maintenance department. Yeah. So we were in the rubber and plastics industry. And so dip molded parts and extruded TPEs, mostly for medical, dental industry, a few other little side things, but mostly that. And so we had just under 200 employees and 3 different buildings, all in Northeast Ohio. And I had maintenance guys in all 3 of the buildings. And my initial jobs were things around setting up programs. So we didn't have a safety program. And I had a real passion for safety. And I worked to develop an entire program for the whole company. We used some bits and pieces of other safety programs, like brought in the parts that worked for us and set that up and did all the training for all 3 plants. And we had multiple shifts at the plants. So I was doing all sorts of training. I got to know all the employees. I really enjoyed that part of it. It was a lot, but it was amazing. We developed a preventative maintenance program. There wasn't really one when I started there. So I worked with the maintenance guys, and first of all, we had to identify every piece of equipment that we owned and start figuring out how we were going to do the work on these to keep them working efficiently and stop all of the breakdowns. We were constantly fighting fires, and there was equipment down, and we'd miss orders because we couldn't really track how things were going. Large equipment would break down often, and even to the point where we had fires because the equipment wasn't managed well. And there would be bearings would fail and wear holes in shafts, and the shafts would fall and things would catch fire. It was a mess.
Imagine what your life would be like if your career aligned with who you are, what you do best, and actually fueled the life you want. At Next Success, we support all ages and stages through career transitions, from students exploring majors or careers to job seekers actively searching or reimagining their next move to professionals committed to self-awareness and leadership growth. Stay connected and explore what's possible at nextsuccesscareers.com and follow Next Success Method on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Dr. Carolyn Sangle. Let's continue listening to Renée's journey to authentic success.
How were they able, because this is something a lot of companies, particularly chemical-related companies that started out, grew to bigger, lots of them didn't have preventative maintenance. And some of the mindsets of those sorts of companies were like, we don't have time to stop and do all this. How did you overcome that? Or was it a fire or some bigger thing? Okay, what was it that made them buy in that preventative maintenance was a good deal?
I think some of it was just continuously bringing up the fact that we were fixing things multiple times. And when we said, if we're going to fix it and we fix it right the first time, we don't have to go back to it and fix it again next week and fix it again next week and fix it again next week. So even though everybody agreed that was the way to do it. The first time I said, hey, this line is going to be down for a week. We have to get parts in. We have to go through it. We have to fix it. For sure, they were not happy. But the president, or maybe he was the vice president at the time, he and I literally pinky swore that we would do it. We'd fix it right the first time. And so he held tight to that. And he said, okay, we're going to figure it out and we'll make do. And we did. And they saw that we fixed it and it got better. And every time that we could make something better, it just saved a little bit of time for the operations group. And it certainly didn't happen overnight. It took months of tweaking, and we constantly had breakdowns. So we were PMing things on a regular basis because we didn't know how far it could go before it actually would break when it was well maintained in the beginning. So it was our system, right? Like we could make it anything we wanted it to be. So with Excel and Word is literally the whole program. And we could adjust it as things ran better and bearings were greased regularly and belts were checked on a normal basis. Maybe it was weekly and then it would go to monthly and then it would go to bi-monthly and then it would go to every 6 months or whatever. And then maybe in 6 months, we'd have a failure and we'd say, oh, nope, that was too far. So then we come back and maybe it's every 3 months we can do something. Yeah, it was quite a process. And the maintenance guys were awesome. They would constantly keep up with all the work and keep up with how the equipment really was performing. And that was awesome.
And then sometime in there from when you started, in between when you started and when you left, you went back to school. What was that about?
Yeah. This company was awesome as far as they paid for my MBA. The owner of our company really values education, and he's helped several of the employees that work there get their degrees. Some of them were undergraduates, some were MBAs. Mine was an MBA from Malone. I'm real proud of that. It was a lot of work after hours, again, working full time during the day and then taking night classes for a couple of years to get my MBA. But I'm pretty proud of that
Absolutely.
happening.
I'm glad that finally somebody kept their promise about helping with your education.
Yes.
So that was,
I was a little worried.
And so,
There were contracts on both sides.
good,
yes.
good. So then you're progressing, continuing to have more responsibility, more great projects that you're working on. And then you started maybe feeling a little bit interestingly, differently. What sort of symptoms did you notice, maybe physically or emotionally or any of that? What started happening and what was your initial response?
Yeah. So it was right before COVID actually happened. One of the plant managers, unfortunately for him, had a heart attack and a stroke back to back. And so he was out for several months with each of those. And we were struggling as a company to make sure everything ran well, though it was okay. And then COVID hit. And I said, hey, all of our projects are canceled. Nobody knew. If you remember back then, we were a medical company. And so we were mandatory. Nobody knew from day to day what was happening and everything was changing. Our projects were canceled. We said, we're not spend money where we don't have to. And I asked, what could I do? What could I do to help? And my boss said, hey, you could go help with this plant that needs a manager and be more involved there. And so that's what I got to do. And I got into the operations side. We started making some great progress. We saw some efficiencies happening and I really enjoyed it. And a year later, that move was made official. And so I went from being the director of engineering to director of operations. And initially, we thought I would take on maybe all the operations, but in reality, it didn't work out. I was still doing the engineering world. They didn't hire for that position. And so I was still doing projects and managing the maintenance department, making sure that was running smoothly enough. And also working on the operations side and trying to really learn and understand, even though I'd been there for maybe about 15 years, but I had never really worked on the operations side and my perspective was completely different. And so I was really trying to understand that better and see where I could really make a big impact from the operations side.
you had basically all your jobs just kept getting added onto. How did that work as far as how long were you working? How much stress was that?
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of stress. And I thought there was an end to it. I thought that based on conversations with the president of the company, that when the fiscal year started, we could budget for another engineer to come and backfill that side of it, do those sort of tasks, and then I could do more operations. And man, it was a lot of stress. I felt like I couldn't get anything accomplished 100% and do a good job with it. I was constantly jumping from thing to thing and trying to get projects done and then trying to get operations efficiencies done. And I really was, in the meantime of all of that, my mom passed away. And there's a lot of, if you've ever had a family member pass away, there's just a lot that goes with that. And so that was going on in my personal life. Yeah, I I'm on some more medications and I felt angry more often. I was stressed. And so I think I would reflect on it as I wasn't a very good manager to my direct reports. And I was a difficult coworker for a while, mostly, I would say, because I was stressed. And
I think you were spending a lot of time being everything to everybody but yourself. Would you agree? Were you putting,
yeah,
so you're the type of person that you're given a challenge, you're given an opportunity to help, and you go all in, and you don't necessarily think about how that's actually affecting your own well-being because you are a giver and a leader and somebody who strives for excellence and gets excellence, but just kept pushing. Is that fair to say?
yeah. Yeah, and I think I was pushing not only myself, I think I was trying to push the people I was working with in all levels, whatever level. And I was pushing, and that wasn't the way I was used to working. And so it created some turmoil. And I had a tough year with a lot of my coworkers. And I don't know that it was any one specific thing. Yeah, I think it was just pushing and trying to do more. And maybe I can reflect that I was losing some trust because I would get into a project and jump on them for not doing it well enough or fast enough. And then I would jump to something else, leaving them in this like puddle of, I don't know what, of turmoil. And then they didn't know whether they should move on and go forward or they should wait for me to jump back in and tell them how they were doing things wrong in the beginning. And so I think that really was eye-opening for me to see that from
And
the
what year was
outside.
this that was going down? Roughly.
That was the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024.
And so then what
Yeah.
led you to reach out? Tell me how that all went down. To reach out to me, like all of a sudden you're popping up in my inbox and it seemed a phenomenal time for both of us. But like from your side, what happened?
Yeah, I was super frustrated. I'm fairly certain that everybody was frustrated at that time. Projects weren't getting done. A lot of frustration on everybody's standpoint. And I just thought, this isn't good. I was mad when I was at home. My husband and I started arguing. I was just angry a lot. And I said, this can't go on this anymore. And I said, I have seen Carolyn's picture twice on my LinkedIn. And she was doing recruiting the last time I talked to her. I'm going to reach out to her and see just if she has anything maybe that, I don't know, just see. And so I would like to say that I was called to call you. I know that it's just LinkedIn and maybe you don't believe, but I know you and I believe. And I saw you on there. And when I called you, one of the things that stood out to me was, first of all, we picked up right where we'd been all the years before. You've been raising children and I've been here working more and you'd been working. Fast forward I don't know, a good few years. And we caught back up almost immediately. Like we were still living in Spanton Hall and we were 19 years old again. And that was awesome. The second thing that I took away from that was that you had left your big career and this is your story, but from my side, that you had left your big career and you were starting your own thing and that you had a 1-year non-compete. And gosh, it had just run out the week before we had our first conversation.
Yeah. And so I remember in that conversation that I just had nothing but compassion, love, and understanding from the point where you were. And I could have that compassion, love, and understanding because I had similarly different company, different thing. I had reached a point where I was outwardly successful by many measures, but inwardly there was rage and there was anger, and I was losing it on strangers. There was a poor checkout girl at Chipotle that got to see my wrath, really embarrassingly for my child who happened to also be there. But like, it was nothing that she did. Really, it wasn't. She was just the wrong person at the wrong time. And I had been trying to stuff down feelings and emotions for so long, thinking that I should be able to handle whatever was happening. And I was so frustrated that some things that I wanted to change about where I worked, I couldn't change. And it wasn't for lack of trying or for lack of giving very well thought out data. It didn't come across the right way. I'm sure I delivered it poorly, but very succinct and matter of fact that this is exactly what's wrong. And I tried to find, I then took time to try to find a way out. And I also realized that this was a recurring thing that I had seen even in many years of recruiting. People had successful positions, high titles, decent salary, good other people that they work with, yet reached a limit, didn't feel successful, and then weren't loving the life that they created. In fact, their life got the leftover. It didn't get the best of them. My family was not getting the best of me, and your family was not getting the best of you. And so when we talked, I was like, hey, I just spent this time and I've got this program that I'm getting ready to start. Seems like it's at the perfect time for you. Would you like to be involved? And how hard of a decision, like it was not very well defined. I had an idea, I had a hypothesis, but it was not proven yet. Yeah. Now it's proven. And you're one of the people that's gone through every single thing. So I'd love to get your view on that. How easy was it to just take a leap and decide to enter into this undefined program at the time?
Yeah. First of all, I know and love you. And I knew that whatever you do, you would be incredibly knowledgeable about. You would come at it from the science standpoint, which is where I love to know that side of it, right? What's the science behind it? And then knowing that you were putting your whole everything into it. You were researching and putting your whole career was going to be this. And I know you well enough to know you wouldn't put everything into something if it wasn't really transformative. And I knew something had to change in me and I could just see it. It was such an easy decision for me to say yes. I knew that it was no problem. Of course, there's money involved, and I was fortunate that I was one of the early ones. And I can understand how people may have some sort of reservation about spending money on themselves for something that is work on yourself that seems like from outside, I can say what we did was complex and deep and really thought-provoking. And you guided me through exercises that, I don't know, maybe anybody could do the exercises. But then when you asked me questions like, why do you think that is? And what might have led to that? Or why do you think you feel that way? And then not only did you ask the question once, you might ask it a couple times to really dig down into what was really going on and things that I didn't know, things that I didn't know about myself. One of the first things we did together was the DISC assessment. And I've done that before through my company, and I've done it with tons of people. So I went in thinking I knew everything. And quite honestly, I was pretty sure that I did. And I could teach this. It'd be fine. It'd be all right. But I'll play along. Okay. So I go in and we get into it. And I'm a high ID. And we were talking about it. And I knew where I was going to end up coming out. And I did. I came out in almost
And
the same
that's why
spot.
I picked that assessment, that particular brand, because it is reliable, valid. Yep. I'm just saying. Clifton Strengths, every time I take it, it's different. I cannot stand behind that. DISC, the one that I picked, it's consistent with somebody's natural style is consistent. The adapted maybe because of their environment. Okay. So you knew where you were going to come out, and you did. And then what?
I knew I even knew all the things that we were going to talk about. Wanting options and being relationship focused and being quick and all these things. I knew all that, and we talked about many of those things, plus some other things that were in there. And then you asked me questions about why I might feel so strongly about people and needing to take care of them. And I think I just lost it. Like, I started crying, realizing like, that is from growing up. I think I mentioned my dad passing away when I was 10. Excuse me. I had a little sister. I have a little sister who was just 6. And so taking care of her and taking care of my mom, that was my role. And so at some point that translated into taking care of people, my employees, my coworkers. And you can hear my puppy in the background.
I love your puppy. Don't worry.
And I think that conversation that we had about what changed and why I was focusing on taking so much care, why I felt like I had to, not that I wanted to, but I felt like I had to take care of all these people. And they, quite frankly, didn't need me to be taking care of them. And it was probably more detrimental. So I knew where I was on that DISC assessment, and yet I hadn't explored what that really meant as a coworker and as a leader. And though I had positives and even that my strengths and weaknesses on the DISC and Indra, I didn't realize that it was so deeply rooted in who I was, and that I could make adjustments to that based on who I wanted to be as a leader. And and pulling those things out after we had that conversation. And that changed so many things.
I think this is important to talk about a little bit further here, because I had that too, right? So it's like meaning when we grow up, certain things happen, ending up being for us at the time it seems to us, or we just one day after the other, and we are adjusting and we are doing the best that we can, and we're getting through, and we're making decisions and observations as children and conclusions as to what that must mean, and then just going around in our life according to the data that we had from when we made that choice. But yet we get so far removed from it that we forget that it was a choice. And some things just become, this is just how the world is. This is just what it is. You're a giver. You take care of people, right? I'm going to be assertive and tell everybody what I think. Like it's so that it can, and we're both going to be really high achieving, get whatever reward or goal is set out there. And without ever pausing, stopping, firstly allowing
Yes.
that space and realizing it is okay to take a minute for my own self. And if I can take care of others, why am I taking the least care of me? I've been walking around
Yeah.
with me this whole time, but just, trying to have that recognition and pause and realization that, yes, I can choose something different. And if it's going to serve you for your future, I think that was the thing too. How's that working out for you?
Yeah.
How are you?
Yep.
And
Yep.
on one hand, I felt like I didn't want to bring up something that became painful memories or sad. And on the other hand, I was so thankful that you felt safe enough in that space to allow some of those emotions that you had ignored or tried to stuff,
Yeah.
tried to pretend they weren't there because
Yeah.
you're super strong and you can get through anything, and just allowing some of that to just be, and for you to start becoming who you are more.
Renée is the kind of woman who brings excellence, care, and energy to everything she does. She built a powerful career, earned the trust of her team, and kept things running, even in difficult seasons. Over time, the joy started to fade. The spark got quieter, and the life she had built began to feel more like something to manage than something to enjoy. In the next episode, you'll hear what happened when she stepped into the Next Success method, how she uncovered the deeper patterns at play, realigned with her strengths and values, and began to create a life and career that truly reflect who she is. The work isn't about fixing something that's broken. It's about honoring who you've always been and giving yourself the space to rise. If you're feeling that quiet pull like it's time for something new, take one small step today. Download the Navigating Career Transitions Guide in the show notes. You have permission to reclaim your future, design a life you want, and show up intentionally and joyfully for what comes next. Be sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss part 2, and I'll see you next time on Your Next Success. Keep going, you're not done yet. Thanks for listening to Your Next Success with Dr. Carolyn Sengel. Remember, authentic success is yours to define and includes aligning your career to support the life you want.